Good morning, everyone, and welcome to New Jersey Black Issues Leadership Conference, the 39th Leadership Conference. Our conference today will focus on education beyond the pandemic, and we are humbled and honored to have three giants with us who have done work to support our various communities. And without any further delay, I should at least introduce myself. My name is Brenda Lee, and I am president of the Greater Newark Alliance of Black School Educators, and I'm also corresponding secretary for New Jersey BIC. Without any further delay, and I do want our great panelists to say more about themselves. I'll start by introducing Ms. Wilson, Miss Valerie Wilson, who's School Business Administrator for the Newark Board of Education. And congratulations to you, Ms. Wilson. You, is my understanding, this is your 26th year as an employee within the Newark Board of Education. So congratulations. So Ms. Wilson, as stated by her title, is a school business administrator. However, her responsibility is quite immense, and it spans not only the operational aspect, the physical aspect within the Newark Board of Education, she also extends herself to the community, the larger community, and also impact what's actually occurring in the classroom. Thank you, Ms. Wilson, for joining us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, I'd like to introduce, and most of us know that Dr. Stephanie James Harris, the esteemed executive director for the New Jersey Amistad Commission, has been on a tour, because although today we're talking about the pandemic of COVID-19, we recognize there's another pandemic that has plagued the United States of America for a long time. And we recognize and acknowledge, Dr. Stephanie as truly a historian. So that's the piece of this conversation I'm sure she'll speak to. But in addition to that, she's a mother, and she has raised two wonderful young men, and has been an advocate within the community at large, and has also pushed a lot of work around the faith-based piece and serving those who are hungry. So we thank you, Dr. Stephanie. We recognize not only are you brilliant, you love the community that you serve, and it spans the entire state of New Jersey. So thank you so much. We are honored and privileged to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
You're welcome. And last but certainly not least, Wilhelmina Holder, trailblazer. Mrs. Holder is a figure within the Newark Public Schools, Newark Board of Education, within the greater Newark community. She's here in the capacity as president of the Secondary Parents Council, and I had to kind of get that out because the reality of it is Ms. Holder is like president of every advocate-based institution within the city of Newark and beyond. She has a heart for the people, a heart for the community. I know that if she ran for any office, she would win, and she would serve the community. And we thank you so much for being here, Mrs. Holder. And we just look forward to hearing from you some of the partnerships that you have continued to establish and grow, especially in light of COVID-19 and how it's impacting our high schoolers. So we know that's near and dear to your heart, but we recognize, because you are a grandmother, your love spans from preschool all the way up to high school and beyond. So Mrs. Holder, we thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate your advocacy and always your willingness to work and meet everyone in the middle. Very collaborative.
Thank you for having me, and thank you I'm so honored to be on the panel with these esteemed women that I've worked with over the years. And you can't do anything, it's not an I, it's a team. And I'm so glad to be on this team with this team of persons that help our children and our parents. And I want to congratulate Ms. Wilson, not just for being an NPS, but she won the International Business Award. I think this is the third time. So, and she's, I think, the first African American woman to do so as a school business administrator. So again, congratulations to you, Ms. Valerie Wilson.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Holder, for kind of bringing that out. Appreciate you. We're going to start with you, Mrs. Holder. So it's a year and a half in the pandemic. Been a lot of challenges. We spoke before when we had our webinar about the impact of COVID-19. This webinar occurred a few months back. Where are you now in this work? The work that you're doing in the community at large, the greater community, with the young people, where are you right now with this work?
That's a good question, because to talk about where we are now with the work, not just the young people, I think the work now for us is also with the parents, the families, because the parents are impacting the young people in terms of the expectations, the hope, the help and support they need. And so all needs to come together. Since school opened, I've had more phone calls from parents trying to navigate this new arena that we're in, because we're really not post-pandemic. We're going through the pandemic. So there are still a lot of issues that we have to face in terms of social emotional support for the families, for the parents themselves who are struggling with food insecurities and things like that. And that really impacts the children. So when we're talking about where we are now with the work has to be holistic in terms of also holding out hope, because in working with the young people, we want them to know that it's a moment in time, because we're not trying to entertain suicide ideations. We're trying to keep that and be realistic about that, but we want to offer them hope as well, to know that they can get through it as our ancestors did. And this is why it's so important that the work that Dr. Harris does brings it together in terms of our historical significance, in terms of the struggles that our ancestors had, and we can use that information to propel our young people forward. So that's where we are now with the work. It's a work of inspiration, education, and support.
Well said. Thank you, Mrs. Holder, and a great segue to you, Dr. Stephanie James Harris, because the Amistad Commission is now separate for the first time from the Department of Education. And so there are some, and I know you have great benchmarks, and there's going to be some accountability pieces there. So where are you with the work?
So in regards to the work, in regards to school kind of reopening and the space we are in regards to the pandemic, I think the central focus for all of us is on really making sure that we take care of the whole child, right? And so that is their social emotional, that is their academic, but that is also in the work of equity. The whole definition of equity is that giving whatever child they need to make sure that they're at par. And so it is not equal, but equity. And so when you talk about even the reality of looking at sort of historical narratives, right? So the equity in curriculum and curricular development is what the Amistad Commission is all about, making sure that there are equitable representations and proper representations of our contributions to the American narrative included in the K-12 curriculum. And as Ms. Holder says, that always will inform our students about the reality of where we have been before, because history has a tendency to repeat itself, or we can learn from it and not be doomed to make the same mistakes. But also the reality that it also gives us a space and a span to be able to recognize that we are in a unique opportunity after 18 months of what I will call unfinished learning. Because I don't like the term that everybody uses, learning loss, because that makes it seems as though that there was a learning and then there's a deficit. I think the reality of the pandemic and its interruptions in our classrooms and in our classroom buildings means that there was unfinished learning that commenced from March of 2020, in which you began to see that students were not able to have gains or did not see learning new materials. You know, we ended the year with a lot of times a review, and then last year with the significance with remote learning in a lot of instances, we have unfinished learning. We have learning that is still needs to be done. And so as we reconstitute children back into the building, I think concentration needs to be on really seeing what that means for the whole child. And if the pandemic did anything, I think it brought to light and to bear not only the inequities in education in regards to curriculum developments, but also the inequities that are a part of our larger society that are only become reflected and exacerbated in our our school buildings. And so when you talk about really making sure that we're looking at the whole child, we need to be able to talk about the reality of that child as a byproduct of its society and its home and its community. So when you talk about the reality of what job loss or economic loss might mean for a parent, we need to be able to talk about social and emotional learning, mental and physical remediations for students that are dealing with issues that are beyond them, and just the reality of even health fears or health disparities. The political nature in which we're in regards to vaccination in different spaces across the states, and the reality that we are still in a pandemic. And I'm sure that Ms. Wilson can speak to this even much more than I, as having to deal on the operational level day to day in Newark. But the reality that we need to be able to be able to understand and reframe that we oftentimes think about education as this thing that we begin in September and end in May with the continuum, but this year is going to be full of ups and downs. The pandemic is still here. So there's going to be pivots that are going to have to be operational because of outbreaks, because of quarantine, because of the reality of what all that means. And so we are not done with remote learning. We did not put it to bed. And so those spaces and places in which we were even able to pivot to it last year, we might not be able to do it that way as we want to just kind of pretend that it's behind us, because we might have parents that went back to work. Right? We were, the first time we were out, we had parents that were home because we're all quarantined, or maybe because, there was employment that was more flexible because we're in a pandemic. The economics of our globe right now is not conscientious all the time of the reality of what students' needs are. And so we're going to find a lot of spaces, most especially when we're also talking about those that are most vulnerable to the losses or to the unfinished learning that has. Students are going to be sent back into remote learning, ill-equipped to do it by themselves and on their own, because their parents have other issues or must be able to have to be gainfully employed. They're trying to do it and assess it for younger siblings. And the reality is, I think that we need to look at that I think is where the historical data in regards of sort of looking at African-American gains and what we do need to make sure that we do, is the reality that we have not thought about what this impact means for the next generation. Right? The economic impact of the pandemic on us longstanding in regards of whether or not there is a shift or a smaller percentage of African-American or minority students that are entering into college, or whether or not they see the economic impact of that being able to do, to apply, or whether or not we see the dropout rates, or whether or not as we venture back into state testing. And even when I start looking at the creation of assessment and assessment questions, we need to take the pandemic into effect. And so, I fear that too many of us want to rush back to normalcy without understanding that we are way beyond normal. That sentiment last year about a new normal has got to really permeate and become hard and fast. Because if we attempt to go back to where we are, the unfinished learning that has transpired are going to send our young people into spirals in regards to their economic gain into their adulthood that will far outpace this 18 months.
Yeah, thank you. And spot on quite a few of those points that you've made. I just want to circle back to one of the first points you made around the equity piece, because being a school business administrator, Ms. Wilson, I am sure it's an immense responsibility by ensuring, even in a city as Newark, there are, Newark is a lot more segregated than people may think. And so so the question for you, Ms. Wilson, is how do you navigate that? How do you ensure, to Dr. Stephanie's point and the point that was made earlier, that all students have access to what they need to be successful?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the well wishes. Welcome to Wilhelmina and Dr. Stephanie. That's a really difficult question to answer, Brenda, because no matter what you do, there are people who will feel that equity has not been reached. And, equity has to be defined, and it has to be a common definition for everybody. And I think we, even as a district, still are working on that and working to get to that. So some of the strategies we use is, as you know, we do something called the weighted student formula. So we look at the demographics of each school. We look at their enrollment. We look at what their free and reduced population looks like, what the classifications of students are in the school. And then we take the funding that we receive and allocate it based on that weighted formula, giving various weights for different characteristics, as it were, of the students. That's in a district this large and a budget as large as ours. We've got like 63 schools. We've got a $1 billion budget, 37,000 kids and 8,000 employees. It is difficult to ensure that that happens across the board, but we use that as one of the strategies. Another strategy we use is to ensure that all schools open with what we call foundation aid. There are certain things that schools need to open. They need a principal, they need a clerk, they need a parent liaison, they need a nurse. Not every school, based on its size and its enrollment, can afford to purchase those things. So they get that off, without being part of their funding. And then we talk about a template or a floor plan that says, here's how we're going to put certain things in place. So you sort of try to make it be even across the stuff. So you've taken note of their differences as a school. You've taken note of their commonalities as a school, and you've put the two together and therefore hope and work to make that funding be what they need. So working along those methods, and there's still adjustments that we have to make, but that's basically how we come together to ensure that we're trying to be as equitable as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. How is the American Rescue Plan or any funding we've received from COVID, how is that helping this work, right? Because part of it is due to the fact that we're in a pandemic and there's going to be some needs, whether it be socio-emotional learning, making sure we have curriculum to support that, making sure we have the teachers to support that, the social workers, whatever it is that we need so that we can meet the needs of our students during this time. And not only our students, like our greater community. So so how is that funding gonna help kind of fill in the gap? Because I know that Newark has been immensely underfunding over the previous administration, and we're not where we need to be as of yet.
No, we're not. The American Rescue Act funds have not been distributed yet. As a matter of fact, that application is due in November. What is known as the ESSER, ESSER 2 funding has been distributed. And once again, that I want to remind people that it is a reimbursement. So you've got to spend to get, right? So that means you spend local dollars, everybody's smiling, local dollars to get the money. It's not a pot of money that we got and, we can spend, right? You got to find the money. So what we did was through Superintendent Leon, a very extensive survey of our stakeholders. We surveyed parents, students, community advocates. We surveyed school administrators, everybody, and we got a whole host of requests. And we took all of those requests and suggestions and put them together and categorized them. And we used that information to inform. We had to actually submit an application for the funding. Even though we were approved for funding, you still have to apply. So we had to submit an application that outlined the kinds of things we are going to plan to do with the money. So I just had a meeting this afternoon, and we actually talked about some of the plans we have. So there are components there for parents in terms of resources, resource rooms across the city for parents with parent coordinators. There's the social and emotional learning component that is both a training component and a programmatic component. So there's training for staff to provide that mental health support for both students and staff, and also taking into consideration our special needs population, our special education group. There are facility pieces, because people talked about, our buildings average 98 years old. That's how bad we are. We only have 19 buildings that were built after 1900 in Newark, and we have 63 buildings. So there's a lot of facility and infrastructure type work that has to be done. So, we're looking at that. We're also looking at tutoring and after school extended day. I know Dr. Stephanie said she doesn't like to hear the word learning, the term learning loss, but we're going to address that in very specific ways. And we already started that with our first batch of funding. We did an extended summer school. We provided summer school to more students for a longer period of time and more enrichment type of programs this past summer. So we were really happy to do that. So we're on that track moving forward. So the combination of providing the physical environment, providing the actual academic environment for children and staff to be able to come together and address the issues that have been raised as a result that existed before the pandemic, but have been exacerbated by the pandemic, are the areas that we are focusing on. So we're really pretty excited about the things that we're going to be able to do and how focused we're going to be on them. And we want to have full transparency to the community. So we're looking at, how do you report that? How do you show people because people are already asking, oh, you got money. We know you got a lot of money, and what are you doing with it? Where's the money? That's always the question. So we want to be able to show people what we spent the money on, what the results are, what's happening. And the last piece I'll say is that there are various pots of money. So you still have title money, right? So you got all the Title I stuff. We get about $24 million of that. You have other grants that we have going on. So there is a need to ensure that there is an overlay of all that spending, and that the spending is coordinated so that we're not spending two pots of money on the same thing, but we are using it to complement each other to get the biggest value for our funds.
Complement, not supplant.
No.
Received. Mrs. Holder. So talk to me about some of the ways that not only work that you're doing, but how you feel as being such a strong family advocate, such an immense voice, and you have a lot of trust. There's important to have a well of trust within the community. And I could say you're a trusted voice in the community. So how's your organization? How are you going to, or have you been supporting whether it be houses of worship, community organizations, North Board of Education, whatever the case, to be able to impact the lives of those families that have been impacted by COVID-19?
Well, and I want to say, first of all, the primary target has been to make sure that parents got information, timely information, so that they can act. So we supported the Newark Boards of Education's efforts to feed the families this summer throughout the pandemic. And that was a big effort to make sure that they knew, because we were on committees, to make sure that the food that was distributed in terms of not just meals to go, but actually food that parents could have, vegetables and fruits and nutritional box of food that they can cook and use for their families to make sure that they didn't have to run all over the city to get it. So the best thing that came out of the Newark Board of Education said, the policy was you can go directly to the school closest to your home. You did not have to go to a school where your child attended. And that was something that came out of meetings we had with the superintendent. Of course, Ms. Wilson was there to make sure that our families did not have to face food insecurities. But also along with that came information about community centers, health centers, where they can go and get health treatment with and without insurance. And some of this was school-based, which I was very happy to say that working with the district, that took place, that the parents could actually go to a school-based clinic like the Jewish Renaissance, now St. Michael's and others, to get the health screenings that they needed for their children and themselves, with or without insurance. And that was a huge factor throughout the entire pandemic. In terms of, and I'm so glad that I was understand they've been approved, Ms. Wilson, is the parent pod piece and the extension of the parent university, where parents will be supporting each other through education. That is huge because we're not able to get into the buildings the way we used to. We were able to structure a parent university with the help of the deputy superintendent to make sure that the parents felt welcome by virtual tours of their buildings, as well as information they got in terms of what was happening this year and throughout the pandemic. One thing I'm particularly proud of is the relationship that the PTA at Westside, in which I'm now a secretary again because my grandson is there, we have a baby pantry for teen mothers. And not just at Westside High School, the teen mothers and fathers came from Barringer, Weequahic, Central, other schools where we gave out, and we're still doing this, baby supplies, strollers and things that the monies that they got from the government did not cover. And so also the support, the emotional support, we're able to engage with the teen parents to ensure, and I was so happy to see some of them walk across the stage in June. It made me so delighted. And teen fathers as well. I'm so glad the teen fathers are getting involved. And part of that is educating, as you said, establishing a relationship without judging our young people. We have to be so careful. We're so, I don't know, I don't want to say, but we have issues around that when we're dealing with our young people. I know we think one way, but we have to listen to them and judge them so they will share with us what their issues and challenges are. So I'm so glad we were able to do that, and we'll still continue to do that. So there are a number of things we're looking at as well. We also look at, we did at Westside, a virtual job fair where we were able to direct parents to actual jobs with varying skill sets. And we offered them the ability to help them write their resumes and cover letters and also do mock interviews. That's ongoing. So those kind of things are important for the parents, and where we could refer them to resources where they can get information about whether it's an ID or whatever their needs are in terms of housing, etc. So that was a collaboration with the city and the city agency. So it's really going to take all of us to support our families in Newark and elsewhere. And we should be on one page in terms of doing that to ensure that our children, if our families are doing well, we could say it's because the children are doing well. So we need to stay focused on that to make sure that the children are doing well. And this is some of the things that we are doing right now in the Secondary Parent Council. And we also will be addressing, as I told Dr. Harris this summer, this graduation requirement in terms of making sure that our children are supported. They have been, their learning has been interrupted significantly, and we cannot expect them to come back as scholars that they are to sit September this month, the school open, and business as usual, and say, we're going to take this state exam in June and everything's going to be fine. It is not. We have to be realistic about the support that we must surround these children with, love and support, not just support, love and support, so that they can feel successful, so that they can feel they can do it. And also, if we have to, perhaps we need to push back and say, maybe we need not do it this year again. Maybe we need to be realistic in terms of the severe learning interruption, because I don't know the capacity of the State Department of New Jersey, the department in terms of the portfolio assessment. We have to look at the whole picture. But one thing for sure, we do not want to punish our children for something they're not responsible for.
Absolutely, Ms. Holder. Great points as always. I do want to ask a quick question as it relates to, because of the interruption, because young people had an opportunity to work, because others were not in the workforce. And so they were able to have a little bit of income. Have you seen a reduction in young people actually going back to school, in school learning versus continuing to work?
That is a challenge in some cases, no doubt. Absolutely. I've been in stores where I know some of the young people, and obviously I'm not going to make a judgment because I know if they're working, it's because they need the money. But also we have to encourage them to continue their education in some manner, whether it's virtual or in person. And I'm really alarmed at the numbers of children who didn't have their education disrupted, and they're not going on to higher education, the ones that have plans to do so. Our county college has a great decrease in enrollment, and so do the other colleges. So we really need to look at that. And the latest figures I saw, obviously I raised girls, but they're boys. I have grandsons. Our boys are being left behind. We really have a crisis. We really have a crisis. And I think we're going to have to get together and figure this out to support our children, to ensure that they can access career opportunities as well as higher education opportunities. Yes, that is a challenge right now. Our children, the families were hurting for the economic dollars. Some of them went to work. It's hard to get them back re-engaged in the learning environment. Like Dr. Harris said, we are unrealistic. We expect them to go back and sit business as usual. We have to figure a way out to help them, to give them the tools they need, given this unique situation that we're in.
So is the Secondary Parents Council or any of the organizations having conversations around students who do need that income but need the education, maybe do somewhat of a hybrid, infuse a evening course, an evening class, see where the students are and track them, meet their needs, meet wherever they are, whatever they need to graduate, while they may continue to get some level of employment, because to your point, they may really need that.
Yes, we're looking at, we're going to recommend to the district, so Ms. Wilson will hear it first, that we have a day and evening academy. Right now, Newark does have an evening academy, but given the situation and the uniqueness that we're in, we're going to recommend that the district provide a day and evening academy for those students so impacted. Because sometimes they also need that support, and I mean more individualized support than 25-to-1 in the classroom. So this is where it could happen in a day and evening academy. They can have more personalized support in terms of getting through the process of learning while they're also earning. And we're going to make that recommendation to the district.
Dr. Stephanie James Harris, I was transitioning to you earlier to ask about, so in 2020, I know that all the trainings occurred virtually, but I know that in 2021, there was somewhat of a hybrid model. Talk to us about that experience.
So, I mean, my goal, I think just like everyone else, we had to make an immediate pivot to virtual learning. And so virtual PD became sort of the status quo for all of last year, and most especially for the Summer Institute. So, I mean, with most of the schools, or with the variety of schools across the state of New Jersey in one shape or another being remote, we tried to make sure that during the 2020-2021 school year, that our trainings were applicable to where the school districts kind of were in their focus. So, but understanding that there is something lost, right? And so I'm listening to Ms. Holder talk about even re-engagement strategies. I think that's sort of a part of the reality of what is going to have to happen, even in regards to social and economic, emotional learning, and really making the the gains from, or the regains from learning loss, but also unfinished learning. So I'll use both terms today. But even for the teachers myself, understanding that a part of the auspices of the Summer Institute training is really making sure that they too, teachers, educators, administrators, community stakeholders that have an invested interest in seeing the infusion of African American history into the K-12 curriculum and need to understand how it fits within curriculum maps or materials or historic narratives, or being able to really see by virtue of exemplar how American history, African American history is American history, right? We really moved to a hybrid model this year because we understood that some things are just best in person, or that they're best when you can experience them. And so just like we are talking about reinvestments with our young people that need to re-engage them, my goal this summer was to try to re-engage teachers and to get them fired up about the learning processes before they went back into their classrooms in September. And so we had a hybrid Summer Institute. We had 3 days worth of lecture, and because the concentration this year, because they're one of the central focuses that we did as a commission this year, and looking at the content standards, was sort of thinking about the reality that students are living in history all the time. I think that the pandemic has not taught us anything, that we are living in places that at some point will be recorded, and that we oftentimes do not think about that in the moment. And so we had teachers kind of reflect on that ideology and sort of made them think about history amongst us, or history beneath our feet. And so we spent the Summer Institute really having teachers revisit and visit spaces across the state of New Jersey, where they could extend their lectures by experiential sort of learning opportunities in historic houses, or in grave sites, and on archaeological sites in towns and in museums, where they could kind of think about the history beneath our feet in the state of New Jersey. And so that's to re-engage, think about how they can re-engage their students with being able to talk about the spaces in which they live and occupy. And so we had a wonderful experience with teachers, trying to follow all COVID protocols. We, put them on buses as much as we could and social distance, and, we caravanned and kind of went throughout the state and really got a chance to kind of look at the reality of African American historical content throughout the state, because history is one of those subject matters if it's taught well, can really re-engage and ignite a student. It really does, because when you're teaching or when you're learning pedagogy, you have all these exemplars about sort of text to self, text to world, text to community. Well, history does all of that. It links you. It makes you see your space in history. And so when you think about information, that's primary goal is making sure that there is equity, but also inclusion in curricula. It also is making sure that students themselves can also see themselves reflected in that narrative. And it is a wonderful kind of re-engagement space to be able to talk about that. But it will all be for naught. I will echo what I know me and Ms. Wilhelmina had that conversation this year, without really being really clear about the fact that students that are getting ready to be tested for graduation requirements left with unfinished learning or learning loss as freshmen in high school, and a lot of times. And so if everybody understands the sheer physical developments between freshman year and junior year, and also academic developments that are necessary to get them there, we need to be cognizant of that, most especially when we need to understand, if we keep talking about the reality of equity, that all districts are not made the same. And so what Ms. Wilson is talking about, or Ms. Wilhelmina is talking about in regards to trying to close some of those gaps in Newark, might not be the same in Summit, because they've had different issues, or in Warren, or in Ocean Township, or in Cape May, or in Whitesboro, one of the spaces we visited this year, Middle Township. And so we need to be very mindful of what that means, and the history of even the reality of what that has meant pragmatically in regards of how we had developed our towns across New Jersey, and what that has means in regards to our school district funding, unearthed the reality of what those equities and inequities sometimes are, and how we sometimes don't have diversifications in our school districts. And so students are looking at spaces. Sometimes we're not looking at someone to the left or the right in their classrooms and on their teaching staff that looks like them. And so they might not understand even their individual struggles, as we had to talk about social and emotional learning and re-engaging them. And so we can't afford to lose any of those students that might be in educational settings that might not be work. It might be other spaces where they might be a few and far between. And what that means in regards of their families still having the same challenges without having the benefit of the programming that Ms. Wilhelmina is talking about. And school districts that might not be able to re-engage them the same way because there is not someone that is cognizant of what is needed for that particular child. And they do need to be able to be opportunities to go back to higher education. We have not really postulated and really pushed to students to understand that there are other higher education opportunities in our community colleges, in our programs, in our trainings and certifications that will still make sure that they are still competitive into their adulthood. Maybe not everyone can afford to take a gap year because of the reality of even financial aid and what that means in regards to being able to re-engage and do that. But there are opportunities. And so, I'm waiting for some of this recovery money to be used for scholarships. That's what I would really love to see, for some of the recovery money to be used, understanding that the economic hardships that have been so, unearthed and have been exacerbated by the pandemic and still will be. Because just please remember, we are only a couple of weeks minus when the securities of the unemployment supplements have run out. And so we really have not even begun to see what the economic impact is going to be on our families and our communities, on our schools, and what that is going to mean in regards of our students and their ability to be able to engage in school, maintain in school, do well in school, their housing insecurity. There's a lot of issues, food insecurities that are still going to be unearthed. But, perhaps if we can use some of these monies even for scholarship opportunities or make sure that they are able to continue on K-16 as opposed to just K-12 so they can be competitive globally, we might be able to remediate some of these issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much, because I do want to ask you one key question and then we are going to close out. The reality of it is not only the high schoolers, we're looking at from the preschoolers. And so every student, you think about someone who was in the 7th grade and now they find themselves in high school. That's a shift, right? And it is challenging. And so we certainly need to plan for it, though. And so because the numbers are going up, that's just the reality. And as to the numbers, I'm referring to the numbers in the infection for COVID-19. Schools are open. The numbers are going to go up more. As a matter of fact, the numbers have gone up considerably in young people, understandably so, because they don't have a vaccination for the students below 12 years old. Ms. Wilson, is the North Board of Education, or even Ms. Holder, or anyone, are we thinking through the possibility of having to shut down again, but maybe be a little bit more proactive in having the state had what we call essential worker locations throughout the state that were, whether it be doctors, nurses, essential workers, their children were able to go to school there. Are we thinking through within the school district like Newark, maybe whether it be areas by ward? Because the reality of it is, if we go fully remote, if we are forced to do so by executive order, we really can't approach it the same way we did the first time. My thought is we probably should have a plan. So what are your thoughts about that? Maybe, and not only in Newark, in every school district, because the reality of it is we're talking about the economic impact of this, and there's some people who just have to work. And we cannot go back to virtual learning was not the best learning experience. We're appreciative that our students all had one-to-one devices in NORC, and we had hotspots and worked all those pieces out. But the reality of it is, we all know, because we may not have a teacher certificate, but we are teachers. We model the expectation. We know what good teaching looks like. So therefore, are there any thoughts around thinking ahead if we should be in a situation based on executive order, thinking through a model, a plan, so that we do have some in-person learning in in a very controlled and safe way, because the state did do it before. So of course, if the state can do it, I think NORC can do it. So anyone want to tackle that question?
Say a little bit about it. We did actually have plans for that when the pandemic first began. We offered the opportunity for doctors and others from Beth Israel to sort of shelter at a couple of our schools, provided them with the opportunity for showers, for sleeping in those first few weeks of the pandemic. That never came to fruition, but we did have a plan. We also had a plan to offer, while it's not full programs as you're talking about, and I think this time around we would have to consider that, but I'll speak about that in a minute. We did have plans for childcare facilities for some of our essential workers. So we had a couple of plans in place. And the reason I say that we would have to think about it this time around is because now we've been through the experience of the pandemic for 18 months, and it has lasted way longer than any of us thought when it initially began. We realized that there is a need for much longer term planning with regards to how we approach and respond to shutdowns, to things of that nature. So that's probably something that we will be discussing in the very near and immediate future, depending on the infection rates as they occur. We have been extremely diligent in our approach to safety within our schools. We were doing screens on the desk. We were doing masking. Unmasking was never an option for us. Even though in April and May, things were getting better, we had already made the decision that coming back in September, we would remain masked. So it wasn't a hard lift for us. It was supplementing our inventory and ensuring that we have things in place. So we were going to continue our safety protocols and are continuing them. So while we've had a couple of cases, I don't want to jinx us, so I won't say it too loud. We haven't had the massive stuff that some of the other districts have been suffering. So we're going to keep that strict protocol in place to ensure that we do what we need.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I do want to take the opportunity to I've said this before, publicly thank you once again for your leadership, because I am an educator, a vice principal within North Board of Education, and we have everything we need. We have masks, we have wipes, we have everything. And it is certainly because of your leadership. And I definitely want to thank you and thank the superintendent. He's always been ahead of the curve as it even relates to both testing and vaccination. So it's not because I work for the North Board of Education. It's a job well done. And we pray for you and wish you safety as you continue to do this work. Ms. Holder, we are getting ready to close out. I do want to turn to you though, because you're out there, and I want to know from you, what is it that you feel And you already spoke about the possible Day Academy, Night Academy, those proposals. What else do you need, and how can NJBIC be supportive of the work that you're doing in the city of Newark to support parents and community and family at large?
Well, our dream is to really expand this parent university piece out into a full school type of situation like they have in South Orange, Maplewood with their school. And in that case, we would ask retired educators and current educators to donate some time to make sure our parents get the skills they need. Because one thing that I'm paying attention to particularly is the type of jobs that are available and will become available. And our parents don't have that skill set yet, some of them. So we're going to need a lot of upskilling, training, and reskilling, and also bring in the older workers as well, help them as well. I think we need to look at it in a holistic manner in terms of social, emotional, the type of things that parents need, as well with mindfulness or yoga, whatever it takes to help them stay supportive of their children. Because obviously a caregiver, it doesn't have to be the parent, whoever the caregiver is, could be your auntie. We know a lot of times it's not mom and dad is working, but godmother looked after us, or auntie. We know our tradition. So I'm praying that that's one thing that the educators and retired educators would do, give back and come back into the community to help us with those pieces, those tutorial pieces, not just for the parents, also specific subject specific to the students, because we're looking at the math, the interruption in the math loss. We have to address that. We have to address the fact, I was talking to a student who graduated from high school, and he told me he loved essays writing. I was so excited. I never heard of a 17-year-old told me they love to write essays. You know me, I love that, being the essay writer for the high school academic support program. But he also revealed to me he did not know anything about James Baldwin. My heart sunk. He graduated from high school, did you hear me? Loved essays, writing, and didn't know anything about James Baldwin. So he's now one of my grandchildren. Right. And we're going to send him, he wanted me to send him stuff. No, we're going to read stuff together. We're going to analyze it. So that's the kind of support I would think that the community, those who have gone through the district, who are well educated, would give back and help the children and the parents. Dr. Harris, I'm so proud of her. She hung in there in midst of, despite everything, with the Department of Education to make sure that Amistad was viable. We need to help Amistad Commission as well give back. And I mean monetary or whatever it takes, write the grants, get involved, because we cannot let that piece go as well. We're talking about holistically serving our community. There is no one piece that's going to be stronger than the other. We have to work together to ensure that our families are well taken care of. This is what NJBIC can do for all of us, in terms of whoever, whatever the will is, whether you're donating time or donating resources or donating money, because we need all of it. The equity piece is, and I'm telling you, looking at our history and being a part of the Amistad Summer Institute over the years, one thing I know for sure, our history is we are a self-reliant people when we work together. That's the one thing I learned. I hope I get an A+, Dr. Harris. That's the one thing I've learned. We are self-reliant, and we cannot afford to fall away from that. So let's come back to that, and let's get together and figure this out. We don't have to beg anybody for anything if we decide this, okay, let's have the breakfast table chats. Let's have the over a glass of wine and salmon. That's where a lot of my ideas come from. Now I'm telling on myself. We have salmon and a glass of wine, and here it comes. So let's get back to that. Let's get back to figuring out and staying focused and keeping our eye on the prize. Thank you.
Amen. Keep our eyes on the prize.
Yes, that's
Absolutely. Right. Hope and power.
And agency. and agency.
Yes.
Dr. Stephanie James Harris, you have the final word before I close out completely. So you had your summer institute. What are you doing? What are you doing right now?
So, I mean, the reality is that, prior to the pandemic, we had the Amistad commissions, the Amistad sort of mandate for the infusion of Afro-American history into K through 12 became a part of CUSAC, the CUSAC review for school districts. And so, the reality is that I know that so many of us are consumed or concerned about what is the first order of business, which is, of course, the safety for our children and making sure that that their remediations for learning and they're re-engaged and that they're safe, there's safe protocols and that their health is concerned and that, we talk about remote learning and how do we pivot and, economic disparities. But the reality is that we also need to understand when I think about what Ms. Philomena just said, is that we cannot afford to allow the eye to come off the prize. I will use that term again in regards of making sure that the intentionality of the work for Amistad in the state of New Jersey is dissipated, or that it becomes something that can go on the back burner, because we'll end up with another 20 years and be still at the same space. We can do all at the same time. And I think that the work of this, the work of making sure that there is infusions that are marginalized people are brought to the table and brought to the curriculum and are present in our curricula and in what students are learning and re-engaging in the classroom is work that becomes very pivotal for where we need to go next directive and the agency that we need to re-engage in. The fact that we have always been a community, when you do look at those examples about how we have had a community engagement and community defining and community uplift, is our lessons that we need to take from history. But we've also been able to speak to each other and re-engage with each other and make sure that we were doing no harm amongst each other. So, although it might be a slight pivot, even when we begin to talk about the re-engagement for students, I want to also just make sure that we are very clear that we also need to be able to, as a community, talk about the reality that we're sending children that cannot be covered and vaccinated back into school buildings. And one of the things that will be extremely helpful is that the adults around them get vaccinated, and so that we can stop the spread. And so as a community, as we begin to talk about the history, as we begin to talk about the reality of our survival and our thriving in this nation, the reality of the disparities of the numbers of vaccination means that we're going to find out very quickly in the next upcoming months where and what school districts are going to have larger gaps in equity and learning loss and, an unfinished learning in interruption of services, in pivot, and resources are going to have to be used differently. It's going to be very evident. So if we do not really remediate as a community ourselves and begin to talk about what we need to do, even in regards of understanding that we are still in a public health crisis, and stop politicizing this, and begin to think about it in the reality of this being life or death, and begin to look at all those little babies and those beautiful faces that are coming through the doors every day, that we want to see all of them make it through the end of the year, and we don't want to see empty classroom chairs. People got to think about it in those terms, right? We've made this political, but the reality is that there are going to be some classrooms at the end of the year, they're going to be minus some babies because of this pandemic, because of the reality of unvaccination rates, and they're not going to be in certain spaces, and they're going to be even more ethnic in certain spaces across the state. So as a community, we really have got to be able to address that, and make some real shifts and think about what we need to do to protect those babies. Because we don't need to talk about educating them at all if we're not going to make sure that they even make it to the next grade. And that's where we are right now. That's where we are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie. Thank you for highlighting that point. It is important that we do get vaccinated. And to the points that you often make, Dr. Stephanie, that we know the facts,
This isn't Tuskegee.
Dr.
I don't want to hear about it.
Dr.
I don't
Stephanie,
want this isn't Tuskegee.
I was just getting ready to plug in the Interfaith Action Movement and the webinar that you did. I stayed back from it, but since you wanted to mention Tuskegee, absolutely it is not. And education is the passport to our future. We need to be educated. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So needless to say, thank you. Our time is up. I do want, just because Ms. Wilson, we recognize and we thank you for all that you do. I do want you and Mrs. Holder just to say a couple of final words, because we kind of pivot into the vaccination conversation just a little bit, but it's important because it does have a great impact on school. And so I do want to give you an opportunity to just say make some closing remarks, brief closing remarks, and also Mrs. Holder. And so for everyone, again, my name is Brenda Lee. I am corresponding secretary for NJBIC. Thank you for joining us. And we'll convene with two of our panelists, two powerful women, all powerful women, just closing out with some final words as we think through beyond this pandemic as it relates to education.
So I would say thank you and thanks for the opportunity again. Vaccines, as Dr. Stephanie has indicated, are extremely important. It is important that our community understand the science and read about the science because it's out there. Don't listen to what you hear on social media that is inaccurate and you have people who have other agendas. Read, research, and learn for yourselves. The vaccine is important. We would not be at this point wearing masks and having to practice social distancing, still in some cases being isolated from our family members if people were vaccinating and taking the appropriate precautions. We are trying to foster that environment in the school district by ensuring that unvaccinated people and staff and students are going to be tested on a weekly basis. We'll be starting that very soon. And we're being really strict about it. And I'm happy to say that 80% of our teachers are now vaccinated. So that is a significant accomplishment, and we are bringing the rest of our staff into alignment with those numbers. So it's a pull and a push, but we're working on it. So if I say nothing else, I say to you, seriously consider the need for you to be vaccinated.
Yes, I would agree because despite what social media says, we're not turning into zombies. Hello. All right, so I'm going to say some challenging words, and I want the families to work together. For me, I'm going to challenge you to work with your children. And by that, I mean love them, laugh, and play with them. Go to the park with them, boil some hot dogs, make jelly and peanut butter sandwiches, and take a hike in the park. Just talk with your children. Let them talk with you. You talk with them. Engage that communication. That's so important. It doesn't take a lot of money or time to do that. Children value time over anything else. You don't have to buy another new game, another new phone, another new bike, another new anything. They want your time. So take the time, set time aside to spend time to play with them. Be silly, jump rope, do the hula hoop with them, talk with them, whatever it is that helps them, that turns them on, because that will help the family grow. And I'm a strong proponent of that. My grandchild said something to me. My grandson, who's 16 now, said something to me last week. He said, "Grandma, you're not walking with me as much as you used to." I went, okay, so we're going to do some more walks in the park, because I didn't realize at that point we're talking about silly stuff, but it's the bond that the children want. So we need to bond together as a family. Please, whatever you do, take the time to do that. Bond with your children. Let your children tell you without judgment now what's troubling them. And I'm just going to suggest we love them. We live with them, we laugh with them, we play with them, we love them, we live, we laugh, we play. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. Powerful webinar. Thank you. And we look forward to the next time we come together so we can glean from your wisdom